In my discussion today, I will give the general outline of the organization of the sensory system and the classification of the sensory receptors. These were the two main objectives of this today's topic. Here, the outline has been provided here, and which I will be discussing in the middle. What is sensory system? It is the system that means both our internal milieu and homeostasis and the responses to the external environment all are dependent upon the reception of the stimuli or the taking of the stimuli, and then that the stimulus is taken up and that is transmitted to the brain and analyzed, interpreted, and then the response is made. This is as far as we think about the external stimuli. Internally, there is a continuous monitoring of our bodily functions, especially the blood pressure, continuously monitored by the baroreceptors. The carbon dioxide tension and oxygen tension, they are continuously monitored. And these, even osmolality and many other factors constantly picked up and they are maintained. So both the external and internal environmental stimuli are sensed by a set of sensory organs or tissues, and they will produce the perception, that is the feeling, and after the perception, the response is accordingly produced at the local site. This is what the sensory system does. Sensation can be conscious, so that means we have a conscious sensations such as the light or the sound you are hearing, the heat or the cold, so on. These are all conscious sensations. There are unconscious sensations. Unconscious sensations like blood pressure, muscle length. We don't know what is the length of our muscle, individual muscles, each and every muscle, but they are continuously being monitored. That is what the muscle tone is. And the muscle tension, the osmolality of the extracellular fluid and the blood. The blood and extracellular fluid chemistry. This chemistry is in terms of the hydrogen ion concentration, carbon dioxide tension, the oxygen tension, and the glucose levels, and so on, so many. Even the thermal sensation, the CSF chemistry, the lung volumes, so on, the list is expanding. So that means sensory systems perform or detect the sensations which can be either conscious or unconscious. These sensations are as a resultant of the stimuli, and these stimuli will produce, because of these stimuli, they are detected, they are perceived in the brain, and then the responses are produced accordingly. There are some general aspects about the sensory system. One is the spatial senses. Another is the bodily senses, that is somesthetic sensations. Third is a visceral sensation. And fourth one I have listed here, the unconscious sensations, which we don't feel about it, but they are necessary for the internal milieu. Coming back to the spatial senses, we have the smell, the vision, the sound, the equilibrium, and the taste. All these things are spatial senses. Why they are spatial? Because they have a specialized organ systems for each one of them. So if you are looking at the olfactory system, the olfactory epithelium is there, visual rods and cones, auditory cochlea, the vestibular system, the semicircular canals or the otolith organs, and the gustatory, the taste buds in the tongue. So there are specialized organs or specialized system. Then They have been carried by a specialized pathway, and these specialized pathway are processed in the brain, that is in the organizational component in the brain in the spatial areas. The exception for this is the taste sensation. Taste sensation goes along with the sensation of the tongue, and the distribution is along with the somatosensory area, that is the generalized sensations, that is the taste sensation. Then one more exception, the vestibular sensation. The vestibular sensations may reach, mostly it will reach to the cerebellum, may not bother to send the information to the cerebral cortex. So like that, there are specialized organs, specialized tissue, and specialized pathway, and specialized brain areas, and these spatial areas at various levels of neuroaxis. At every level they are. Now, even in the brain, the auditory system is in the temporal cortex. Then the visual system is in the occipital cortex. Olfactory is associated with, along with the limbic system, the olfactory cortex. So then gustatory shares with the parietal cortex along with the somesthetic area. Then what is somesthetic sensations? These somesthetic sensations are the external sensations, the skin and the deeper tissues of the body, they detect. These are somesthetic sensations. And these somesthetic sensations are touch, pressure, vibration, thermal sensations, warmth or cold, and the proprioception, that is a detection of a position sense, and the pain. Pain may be coming from the skin or the mucous membrane or from the deeper organs. So along with the somesthetic sensations, the viscera join the somesthetic sensation according to the dermatome of origin. So that means they will converge on the somesthetic pathway of the dermatome. The viscera has been embryologically determined. So that means, as you know about the pain produced by the heart, where it is detected in the tip of the shoulder or the radiating down the arm, or the pain of the kidney, maybe on the low back, something like that, the visceral sensations. So then I mentioned about unconscious sensations. They are specially required for the maintenance of the internal milieu. Having looked into the general aspects of the sensory system, now what is the plan of the sensory system? So you look here on this side, the reception, the transmission, and perception. These are the three common words for the assessment or the processing of the sensory system. So that means receive the information, and after receiving the information and transmit it to the areas where it is processed, and then after processing, that is the analysis, that is the perception. Now, the receival of the information is performed by the receptors. This reception is by the receptors. And these receptors, along with the nerve, they transmit, that is the transmission, that is the pathway. Then perception, that will reach to the brain areas, specialized brain areas, that is where the processing is done. Now, if you are trying to join here, the receptors, in terms of the this thing, what they do, they convert one form of energy to electrical energy. They are transducers. These receptors are transducers, and these electrical signals are transmitted in the nerve fiber. So now the receptors, I said they are transducers. At the same time, these transducers are intelligent in the sense they codify the information. So that means they have they detect the change, and also they will codify. This is a touch, pressure, pain, or thermal. So all things are codified, and that is regarding all the properties of the stimulus intensities. Then they are transmitted as Xn potentials. Xn potential are all are non-responses. These codified things, the Xn potentials are either in a burst or either one after another, so on so forth. Then they will reach to the CNS areas, especially the cerebral cortex, the specified areas in the cerebral cortex. And these are these areas where this is decoded, analyzed, interpreted, and the action was taken or action will be taken. So this is the general plan of the sensory system. Two types of sensory pathways. One pathway is transduction and encoding is done by the single unit, that is the receptor and its axon. So say for example, in somatosensory or the olfactory systems, where the receptor cell is a neuron, along with its axon, the axon potentials are generated and they will reach to the brain areas and then brings about the response or the detect the whatever, the smell or the touch or whatever. Now the receptors, in this particular series, they perform two functions. One, stimulus translation, that is the transduction of the stimulus to electrical, and then encoding of the information. So these are the two things the receptor does here. And there are other systems, especially these specialized systems or spatial senses, gustatory, visual, auditory, and vestibular systems. They involve two or more units because transduction and encoding are performed by two different cell types. In case of a light, where rods and cones receive the information, they transduce the information to electrical one. Then after that, the encoding is done by the bipolar cells or the ganglion cells. So that means the transduction and encoding are performed by separate cells. As happens, the stimulus translation is done by the sensory receptors. Say for example, in case of a taste bud, the epithelial cells, and especially these epithelial cells again have 5 different classes of the epithelial cells which detect 5 different taste sensations. Then rods and cones, these detect the light. The hair cells in case of the cochlea or the vestibular system, we detect the stimulus. And the encoding is done down the lane in the subsequent neuronal thing, and that encoding is performed. This encoding is more complex especially in the visual system, because even in the retina there are at least a bipolar cell. There is one synapse between the rods and cones with the bipolar cells, and from the bipolar cells with the ganglion cell another new synapse. The bipolar cells and the ganglion cells, they will have another set of synapses or synaptic modifications or modifiers. So either they will be just trying to modify this or encode this information. And even there will be different type of cones, different type of ganglion cells which can detect the color, because you see the color we see in the world, it has so many hues and aspects. Classification by receptor according to complexity. Here you see a plan. This is the touch sensation. Here is the free nerve ending, and it is these are dendrites, and then the axon, dorsal root ganglion, and this is the spinal cord or the brainstem. And this is one free nerve endings, dendrites having little or no specialization. No specialization. Encapsulated nerve ending, if you are looking at this, maybe this is Pacinian corpuscles or Merkel discs. Maybe Merkel discs are here in this category they are coming, or any other capsulated the nerve endings. There is a connective tissue around the free nerve endings. Dendrites or terminals are enclosed in a capsule of connective tissue. So like this. Or in case of the visual system, these are rods. This is a rod, and this rod will have a synaptic contact with the bipolar cell. They consist of sensory neurons with the receptors for the spatial senses, especially for vision, hearing, smell, taste, equilibrium, and together with the connective epithelial and other tissues. So there will be so many things coming up here. So then at the end, whatever the visual output is coming. So these are the type of receptors, either free, less complicated, little capsulated, little complicated, because so why these changes? It is to enhance the uh, ability of the receptors to detect the change or the stimulus. Now I describe here a somatosensory pathway. They have three neurons. The one is the neuron from the skin or the mucous membrane reaching to the spinal cord. This is called a first order neuron. First order neuron from the spinal cord, or it will either cross at the segmental level, or it will go up to the medulla and then cross in the medullary level. So now this segmental level, if it crosses, it goes to the opposite side and ascends up to thalamus. So that means we have a second order neurons which are coming from the spinal cord or the medulla to the thalamus. This is the spinothalamic tract. Then from the thalamus, third order neurons, they will come. These are as a thalamocortical projection. So this is the parietal cortex here. So they are projected to the parietal cortex in all the areas of the parietal cortex. And then this is the third order neuron. So that means we have three orders of neuron. So that means this is starting with a receptor. Receptor is a transducer that receives the stimulus and that produces the action potential here. So this action potential generation depends upon the generator potential, and then that would produce the action signals in the first order neurons. Then first order neurons relay in the spinal cord or the brain stem, and then they will ascend. Then the relay is taken up by another set of neuron. This is the projecting neuron that will go to the thalamus. Now the second order neuron crosses to the opposite side and reach the thalamus, and third order neurons from the thalamus. So now utilizing, so this is a primary area of representation or primary sensory area. Each one of these sensory modalities, they have a primary areas, then followed by the secondary areas, and then association areas. So then secondary areas and association areas help to analyze the whatever the sensory modality which has been detected, because they are essential for decoding, analysis, interpretation, storage, and all other purposes of the sensation. This is the general plan. So general plan is a three order neurons. The first order neuron from the periphery to the spinal cord, from the spinal cord to the thalamus, the second order neuron, thalamus to the cerebral cortex, third order neuron. Now coming back, I have just summarized here, starts with the neuronal ending, that is sensory receptor. Then it becomes axon there. Then axon, it relays in the spinal cord or the brain stem. Then that is the first relay. Then from the axons of these neurons, they will relay to the, they become the second order neurons. They project and cross to the other side and relay in the thalamus. And from the thalamus, thalamocortical projections relay at layer 4 of the granular cells of the cerebral cortex. In the cerebral cortex, the layer 4 is the area which receives the inputs from the thalamus. All sensory system relay in a specific areas in the thalamus. I'm trying to talk about ventro-posterior-lateral nucleus of the thalamus. So this is the sensory modality area for the somatosensory system. However, for the olfactory system, there is no relay in the thalamus. So the thalamus do not have. However, some of the information will come back from the olfactory system along with the limbic part into the thalamus. That means after it has been relayed into the olfactory cortex, it comes back. Then what is sensory receptor? Because if you are looking at this aspect, this is the starting point here, the neuronal ending, the sensory receptor. What is sensory receptor? It's a modified part of the neuron or a dendrite, or it is a specialized structure that is associated to detect the stimulus, and not only detection, transduces, change the format. That means the whatever the energy level, whether it is a physical, chemical, mechanical, thermal, or photic, that energy is converted into electrical energy. So again, it's a modified part of the neuron, or it's a specialized structure to detect the stimulus and transduces into electrical energy. That is sensory receptor. In the simplified ways, receptor is the modified part that transduces and codifies the stimulus that is propagated or transmitted as an action potential in the nerve to the centers. That is the receptor. Another definition. Basically, the receptor performs the 5 major functions. 1, the reception. Number 2, the amplification, because the receptors provide the mechanical advantage for, or they will be efficiently transmitted or propagated. So even there are free nerve endings at the hair follicles. They utilize the hair follicle as a lever. This leverage would make it stimulated easily. So, and that will transform the one form of energy to electrical energy. Here it is only electrical energy in the nerve. Then this electrical energy is traversing as action potential in particular burst or particular pattern. So that is codification. And this is transmitted at different levels, at 3 different levels: the first order neuron, second order neuron, third order neuron. And at each level, there is some amount of a change, there is some amount of a modification or processing happening. Receptors are classified according to the location of the stimulus. So whether the stimulus is away from the body, or whether that is there within the body internally, that is interoceptors, or exteroceptors are outside the body, external part of the body, or the proprioceptors. Proprioceptors are the positioning receptors. So that means you can detect the smell even from the distance, or you can detect the sound or the sight. So that is the telereceptors. Interoceptors are the internal receptors present within the internal organs. Those are interoceptors. They are necessary for homeostatic release. Say, for example, the blood pressure regulation, the chemical composition of the blood, or the thermal sensations in the hypothalamus. These are interoceptors. The external one are on the surface, whatever we will talk about here. So this is one type of classification: telereceptors, interoceptors, exteroceptors, and the proprioceptors. Proprioceptors detect the position sense. Then according to the stimulus type, so if you are thinking about the type of stimulus, they are mechanical, thermal. This is the mechanical energy, thermal energy. This noxious, noxious is the injurious stimulus. Injurious, noxious stimulus are known as nociceptors. Or electromagnetic, as happens in case of the photoreceptors. Or chemical receptors. These are the 5 modes of stimulus type that I will describe in the next slide. They are also classified according to the adaptation, whether it is rapidly adapting, slowly adapting, non-adapting. They are also classified according to the activity pattern, whether they are continuously giving the information, or they are giving the information in a burst of activity and then remain silent. that is the tonic and phasic receptors. Let us see. So I have already dealt with the location or the placement of the stimulus. Now I will look into these stimulus type. Now this is according to the stimulus type. First is the mechanoreceptors. If you are looking at that mechanoreceptors here, the first is the mechanoreceptors. The mechanoreceptors which are situated superficially, that means on the skin or the mucous membrane surface. So that means they are in the epidermis or dermis area. So these receptors are free nerve endings. That is already I mentioned about free nerve, or the nerve endings having expanded tips, just as happens here. Here you have the expanded tips here. These are free nerve endings. Or spray endings. These are spray endings. These Golgi tendon complex or Ruffini or the spray endings. These are free nerve endings only, or they are nerves distributed in a random fashion, as if happens in case of a spray. These two are spray nerve endings. So Ruffini endings and the Golgi tendon organs. Or they may be encapsulated as if this is the typical onion peel. This is the Pacinian corpuscle, or Meissner's corpuscle. This is also encapsulated, or Krauss corpuscle. You see the central core of the nerve, and it is having this thing. So these are Krauss, or hair end organs. These are hair end organs. In the hair end, these tactile hair, they will be detecting, so that movement of the hair, they will utilize the movement of the hair as a leverage to detect the change. So these are mechanoreceptors which are located superficially, that is in the epidermis and dermis. Now now I mentioned about the mechanoreceptors situated in the deep tissues. Especially these are also the free nerve endings. So they are expanded tip endings. They will also be there. And the spray endings, Ruffini endings. And we have the encapsulated endings. So they will be having a Pacinian corpuscles and other types. Maybe some other types they may come up. Then muscle endings, you have the intrafusal fibers, the muscle spindles. And the Golgi tendon receptors, that is the spray nerve endings, that is the Golgi tendon organs. Then hearing and equilibrium, these are in the deep. These are hair cells. Both of them, they have the hair cells in the cochlea and the hair cells in the vestibular system. These hearing and equilibrium, they are having a hair cells in the cochlea and hair cells in the vestibular system. Or you can see the baroreceptors. These are detecting the arterial pressure. Baroreceptors present in the heart and the great vessels. So even you have a baroreceptors, these are stretch or mechanical receptors that detect the stretch. Coming back here, the other type, so the numbers 2 to 5 other receptors. Thermoreceptors. These thermoreceptors are, we are having a cold receptors and warm receptors. They are on the skin, and their distribution in the skin areas is different, and that is the thermoreceptors. Then we have a nociceptors. Nociceptors are very difficult to define, but they are free nerve endings. But if you are thinking about a nociception, if somebody beats the drum or the percussion, the pain of it. So that is a nociceptors. Then you have they are highly sensitive. They detect even the small magnitude of light, small quantity of light. The cones, they are for a daylight. These are for a night lights. That is a scotopic and a photopic. So these are the rods and cones. They detect the light sensation. Then we have chemoreceptors. So we have number of chemoreceptors. One chemoreceptor immediately comes is the taste. The taste is taste buds. The whatever the molecule is either a sweet, sour, or whatever the molecule, bitter. So that molecule stimulates these taste receptors. They are located. These are chemoreceptors. The smell is again olfactory epithelium. The aerosols sit on the olfactory epithelium. Again, these are chemical aerosols, so they will detect in the olfactory epithelium. The arterial oxygen that is in the carotid body, aortic body. So these detect the glomus cells, detect the oxygen tension. So that is arterial oxygen. Also, they also detect the carbon dioxide. Maybe here you can just see that. Then osmolality. Osmolality is detected in the osmoreceptors located in the supraoptic nucleus of the hypothalamus. They will detect the osmotic activity of the extracellular fluid and the blood. So these are situated. These are osmoreceptors. And maybe we may have the osmotically whenever we are feeling medulla. These are central chemoreceptors or peripheral. That is a peripheral chemoreceptors. The central chemoreceptors, peripheral chemoreceptors detect blood carbon dioxide level, and they also detect the central chemoreceptors detect the H ion concentration. Similarly, the blood glucose, amino acid, fatty acids, they are detected. They are essential for the metabolic homeostatic functions. These receptors are located in the hypothalamus, and some of them are also located in the beta cells. Beta cells detect the glucose level. Accordingly, the insulin secretion from the pancreas is governed. Now, what are tonic and phasic receptors? I mentioned depending upon the type. The tonic receptors, you just see that here is the time where it was turned on. The stimulus is turned on and it is being stimulated, and here it is turned off. As long as you keep it on, there is a continuous activity. These are called tonic receptors. Continuous activity produce a constant rate of action potentials as long as the stimulus exists. Say, for example, baroreceptors, because they have to monitor the blood pressure for every beat to beat, or the chemoreceptors. If they stop doing it, and our existence will be, our homeostatic regulation is at stake. Similarly, the pain receptors, if something is painful to you, and if they adopt or if they are phasic, then you will forget about the pain. So pain receptors are tonic receptors. They continuously tell you that I am here, I am producing pain. Then phasic receptors. These phasic receptors produce burst of activity. You just see that this is a burst of activity when it is turned on, and it diminishes. So that means burst of activity upon application of the stimulus, as it happens here, and then they disappear, they become less sparse. This happens in case of Pacinian corpuscles, muscle spindle. Muscle spindle, what happens when you tap the muscle? There will be burst of activity. Then it becomes silent. So this is a phasic receptors. They have importance. Each one have their own advantages and their own functionality. Then, according to adaptation, I mentioned that rapidly adapting, slowly adapting, non-adapting. Here, I see this is the stimulus. You just see that this is the stimulus applied. When I have applied the stimulus, you see that burst of activity coming up. This is the direction potential, the burst of activity coming up. And then what happened? It became silent. This now becomes silent. This is rapidly adapting, because as long as you stimulated it and it becomes adapted, so there is no further stimulation. So now in this case, if you just see that this is slowly adapting, so it will have a burst of activity, and then it takes some time, then it adapts, it becomes it will not respond, slowly adapting. And here is the case of the non-adapting. So that means the burst of activity, so then it will be further added up, and you see that the activity remains. This happens in case of a painful stimuli or a continuous stimuli. This is a non-adapting. The blood pressure, baroreceptors, the chemoreceptors, the painful stimuli are non-adapting receptors. Slowly adapting receptors, there are some receptors, especially in the muscle spindle, they are slowly adapting the group 2 fibers, and rapidly adapting our group 1 fibers. So this is about this thing. And some receptors, especially the Merkel disc, Pacinian corpuscles, and the Meissner's corpuscles, they behave. So you have again the same. This is rapidly adapting, slowly adapting. You just see that it's almost, it is not adapted. And there is another receptor here. It is also rapidly adapted, much more rapid than this. And this is slowly adapting. These are the type of receptors, the slowly adapting, rapidly adapting, and non-adapting receptors. In summary, functions of the body are regulated and modified by the external and internal stimuli. These stimuli are detected, transmitted, analyzed by set of neurons, and these set of neurons constitute what is called sensory system. And this would to bring a response according to the requirement or the stimulus. The sensory system operates either consciously at a conscious level or at unconscious state. That means sometimes unconscious state, our blood pressure is continuously monitored, or our blood gases are monitored. Some sensations require spatial organ systems or areas in the brain, and these are called spatial senses or the spatial sensations. Others are in common with the body, the somatic body structures, the skin and integuments and the mucous membrane. These are common area. These are called somesthetic senses. Somatosensory pathway has three, in general, consists of a receptor and a three set of neurons. First one, from the periphery to the spinal cord or brainstem. Second one, the opposite, it crosses from the brainstem or spinal cord to thalamus. Third one, from the thalamus to the cortex. These are the three orders of, or a three set of neurons. So now I mentioned about that first order neuron relays in brainstem or spinal cord. Second order neuron crosses this crossing and relays in the opposite side. Third order neuron relay in specific areas of the sensory cortex. And the receptors can be classified according to location, stimulus energy, and according to the adaptation property. Okay, so this is the summary of this thing. And I have given some of these questions for your assignment. Write short notes on the following. Draw a diagram depicting the organization of the somatosensory system. Try to make it in your own, and that is important. Classify sensory receptors according to the stimulus energy. Classify receptors according to their activity and adaptation with the help of diagrams. Classify receptors according to location of receptors. Differentiate tonic and phasic receptors. Differentiate rapidly adapting and slowly adapting receptors. List the conscious and unconscious sensations. Okay, so now these are the Guyton. I have already shared this Guyton book, and I have taken it from the Guyton's textbook, some of the things, and from the candles I have taken some information. The Genong and Samson Wright are my base books. Next class I will discuss about the properties of the sensory receptors. Okay, thank you.